Hi, welcome back to the 5th episode of At Home with Cathy, where we are painting our way through my house, 6 different styles, 36 paints, and 6 waxes. Today we're in the dining room, and this is your second visit to the dining room if you've been following this series. And I promised you that I would have the dining room table all done. I don't have the dining room table all done because I've discovered that this dining room table is the perfect height to work at, so it's going to be the last thing I do in this room. And here's what I've been working on in the meantime. When we changed the color of the kitchen cabinets, which were originally going to be a green, to a blue, it kind of affected what I was going to do in here. You can't have a green sitting smack next to a blue. It's just too much color because there's very little wall space between these two rooms. And visually I found that it was just so busy. I love color, but I don't need it to kind of slap me in the face every time I walk through the house. I want it to flow, not be an abrupt, oh, I'm in a green room, oh, I'm in a blue room. So I revisited the palette that we had decided to do for this. The theme we're using for our dining room is the Swedish theme. The Swedish theme has many of the same colors. This is my cheat sheet for the Swedish theme. Has many of the same colors that we saw in our country kitchen. Paris gray, Aubusson blue, the country gray, but it adds some brights, which is great in a dining room. You do want a little more color maybe in your dining room. So what I decided to do was add it to the chair cushions, or the chair pads on the chairs. Now people kind of go, wow, you can paint fabric? Yes, you can. The only rule about the fabric on these chair seats is that it has to be in good condition. If the fabric's worn out, you're not going to be able to paint it with any great deal of success. You can't rebuild the fabric with the paint. These chairs are on their way to wearing out, but they're going to be a great project for us to paint. First thing to do is to give them a good scrub. So one night I filled my sink with hot water and Dawn dish detergent, and I used a dishcloth and I scrubbed these chair pads. And they actually came out really, really well. So I've got a few stringers here, but I'm going to show you what we do about those. So this is what we started with. First thing I do is water my paint down. This is Paris gray paint. You can see that you can still see some of the little dots through here. This is half water and half paint, and I measure it. I use a measuring cup, pour my paint out into a container, scoop out the paint with my brush and fill this up with water and do it so it's a 1-to-1 ratio. And I want to thin that paint out a little bit. The reason I want to do that is I actually want it to absorb into this fabric a little bit. I run the risk, if I don't water the paint down, of the paint just kind of sitting on the top of the fabric. And if it does that, the moment I sit on it, it's going to crack. So I actually want it, I'm really dyeing the fabric is what I'm doing. And it's not a quick process. It's going to take several applications. So this is one coat of 1-to-1 water and paint in Paris gray. This is my second coat. Same deal. 1-to-1 water and Paris gray. And this is probably going to be true for almost anything you paint, because again, I don't want it to be a hard, crunchy surface. I want it to be soft. So I'm adding another layer of dye to each of those threads, and I work it all in. I use my round brush, and we're going to show you that in a minute. But you can see a progression here. How I started, my beige is all pretty much gone by the time I've done the first coat. By the time I've done the second coat, my colors that were in the little dots are gone. And by the time I've done the third coat, I'm almost the same depth of gray here, and I'll show you. We're going to paint some stripes, but this is my third coat. And you can see how smooth that is. So basically all I've done is created a textured fabric. Does not crack, and we're going to go back to this in just a minute. So that's why I didn't paint the dining room table, because I had 8 chair pads in various stages of being washed and painted. And this table ends up being the perfect height to work at. So it's going to be the last thing I do. But what we're going to show you today is what you do in between your coats. So this has one coat of paint on it. And you can see when you get up close to it, there are lots of little sort of stringy pieces that are coming off the fabric. fabric's a bit like wood. When you get it wet, you sort of raise the grain or make it stiffer. And this actually kind of sounds rough. You take a very fine sandpaper, this is a 220, and you just gently sand off those bits. It seems a little crazy that you're sanding fabric, but you can actually see these bits are disappearing. They've been made stiff by the paint. And so they sand. I'm not sanding hard, very little pressure, but I'm going to go over the whole thing, just a little bit. And it actually goes from feeling very stiff and rough to feeling smooth. And I'm hardly removing any paint. That's not the goal. You don't even see any paint here. All I'm trying to do is remove the bits of fabric that are sticking up, that are making this rough. I'm going to go all around, and I just keep checking it with my hand. You can see these little bits are just disappearing. I'm not worried if I don't get them all in the first go around because I'm going to sand between each coat. But now it's nice and smooth. If I feel a rough bit, I'll go back. I'm not sanding too much on the corners because that's where this fabric is starting to wear. This is kind of something you might do if it was a temporary measure. If I found a piece of fabric that I absolutely loved, I would probably just recover these chair pads. But we use our table quite a bit when we entertain, and we have a lot of family games around this table. What we're going to end up with are wipeable chair pads. So who knows, maybe I will love them and never recover them. Because fabric ones aren't always the best thing when you have families and parties and games and cats. So, I've pretty much removed all those little fuzzies. And now, it's a lot softer even sounding. So we're going to paint it. I have measured paint into the container. I have a cup, or half cup, sorry, of full strength Paris Grey in here. So I am going to add a half cup of water. Stir it up really well. Paris Grey is a funny paint. When you open the can of it, it's often white on top. There's quite a bit of white in this paint, and that white separates out. So it's really important that you do stir your paints really well. They may not look like they're separating, but the pigment could be all at the bottom, or one of the pigments that actually makes that color up, and you don't want that. You want a nice, well-stirred paint. So I'm using my my medium round brush, and I just always start on the edge. I don't have to go underneath because this is going to be down on the seat part, is going to be down on the chair, so you're not really going to see it, but you are going to see the back. Now, one thing I quite often do, I am actually going to add a little bit of more gray paint to that because I think I actually watered it once already. So I'm going to measure a little bit of paint. This is one that I had already watered out. I'm going to add my paint. You can see why I like working on this dining room table. It's the perfect height if you're 5 foot something. Top back on and stir this again. I could tell I had already done it because it was too watery. I should actually see some paint pigment or some actual paint color on there. Just give it a really good stir again. That's better. You should see it. There you go. So something you have to do sometimes when you're working with fabric is work with a wet edge. Because the paint, if your fabric is really dry, will soak in and create kind of a ridge. So I'm just going to get this wet just a little bit in the spray bottle. That's also useful if the cat's not cooperating. But today Sawyer's being really good. So I'm going to paint my edge. I don't need to worry about painting too much on the inside of that corner because that's where it goes into the chair. Go around, paint my next edge. You can see I have a couple of 2x4s here. They work really well because I want to keep my cushion up off the table. I don't want it to, my chair pad up off the table. And they give me sort of an area where I can actually paint around and not have the chair, the pad come into contact with the table. It can be up on top. I also keep painting cloths on the floor because this is a little bit sloppy and it will drip down onto your floor from your brush. Just keep going all over. I'm working it right into the texture of the fabric. If I don't do that, I'm going to end up with spots that aren't evenly painted or dyed. This paint is so great as a dye. It will soak right in and give you fantastic color. So this is kind of a combination of dyeing and painting. I'm going to get right down here. I do right to the edge, because that will be seen when it sits on the chair, so I need to make sure I've got my edge painted all the way around. You can see it's pretty loose as paint because I've got it a 50-50 water and paint, but I've got great coverage. And then the second coat will dry. This probably in our house, we've got a wood furnace, so it doesn't take very long, and I keep a fan. It would probably take an hour or two to dry thoroughly. I want it really dry. Just go back over and have a look at it all the way around. I should see a nice even cover of paint all the way around. Check my corners. There we go. So now I would just let that dry, and it will dry to this kind of finish. This has two coats. I will sand it again because I can already see that it's got fluffies coming up, and put my third coat on. My third coat is pure paint, no water. It's just pure paint, and so I get that nice solid color. So let's move on, and I'll show you how I'm going to use the colors that are in the Swedish palette as part of the artistic effect on these chair pads. So the palette of colors that's in the Swedish collection includes Earls, which is a warm sort of golden yellow, Primer Red, which is kind of like an old barn board red, Scandinavian Pink, and Chateau Gray. Those are some of the colors. There are others. Paris Gray's in there, and Country Gray. Plus, there's a Louis Blue that you could use as well. And I wanted to bring those colors in here, but I don't necessarily want a whole lot of it. I like the dining room to be able to be decorated at Christmas time, so I don't necessarily want the whole room to be pink or blue because that won't look good with my traditional Christmas tablecloths. But I want a hint of what we're trying to do here. When we finish the table legs will be gray, the chairs will be gray, so we need a little color somewhere, and the chair pads are a great way to do it. So I've done a little experiment. I'm using painter tape. You can get painter's tape in all kinds of widths. And I've done a series of stripes here. This is an easily reproduced thing. I just measured here, made a mark on with a pencil in the center on each side, found the half, and started with one strip of tape here. And I'm just doing an offset of 5 strips of painted fabric. So I've done 3, and I've left this so that we can do the second coat of the Scandinavian Pink. I work with wax paper a lot because you can just pour a little bit of paint out and work with that. It stays fresh for as long as you're using it. So I'm using a small watercolor brush. I need something that's going to get in to the texture of the fabric, but I don't want it to go under the painter's tape. So this painter's tape is on my chair pad. And it has this particular cushion. The chair pad has, I keep calling them cushions, has 4 coats of paint on it. I'm sorry, 3 coats of paint. 2 that were half paint, half water, and the last one was solid paint. It just depends on your fabric. You may need 4, you might get away with 2. You're just going to have to experiment, but it only takes me a minute or 2. And normally what I do is I have the fan going, and by the time I've got my next stripe done. My first one's ready for its second coat. So we're just going to leave that there for a second. The fan blowing the air over the paint just helps evaporate the water that's in the paint, and it dries very quickly. So that's my Scandinavian pink, and the other color I want to add on here is Chateau Gray, which is kind of a nice green, a sagey green. And when I pull this tape off, you're going to see that I had 3 other colors on here. I used the Arles as my first stripe, and the Scandinavian pink is next to that. The stripe in the middle is Primer Red. Give it a little blast of color. And my Chateau Gray is going to be next to that. And the very last stripe in the 5 stripes is the Aubusson Blue. Those are all colors that are in my runner, which was the inspiration for this room in the first place and for the Swedish theme. These colors are all very soft. They blend together very well, but they're going to have a little bit of brightness that I'm looking for in this dining room. Go. So we'll let that dry for a minute, and while that's drying, I'm going to talk about what we're going to do with these cabinets behind us. So before we talk about the cabinets, we're going to take a minute and look at the furniture. These chairs are sort of not a red, they're a golden brown kind of a wood stain. And I wanted to take that away, and I wanted to give it a softer painted look. So I played with the colors a little bit, and that's how I came up with the Paris Gray. The Paris Gray is a great neutral. It has what I consider to be a little hint of blue in it, so it ties in really nicely with the kitchen with the duck egg blue, particularly since we use the white wax on the doors. It kind of is a soft, very soft echo of that color. This is what it looks like with one coat. Now these chairs are not fun to paint because they've got all these little nooks and crannies, and I have to keep going back and forth to check and see if I've got any drips on them. But here's the nice thing about this paint. If you're all done and there's a great big drip there, just let it dry, sand it off. If you have to touch it up a little bit, you can. It just sands beautifully. It's not going to be a hard gob at the end of one of these little V's. So that's one coat. I let it dry thoroughly. And again, before I started this, I washed all the chairs. I find painting chairs is much easier if you can do it on a table, mostly because if I sit and do anything on the floor, I have help, and they sometimes carry my brushes away, those 4-legged helpers. So I like to just paint on a table. I find this table is a really good height to paint at. And we're just going to go over here and have a look at this chair with its 2 coats of paint. I think that's going to be enough on this chair. All the dark is gone. It's all nice and one solid color. But I also know my family. We're going to really use these chairs, and they're going to start to show wear because we push them in and out, and I know we're going to put our feet on the rungs. So I think what we're going to do is sand it down just a little bit, just a tiny little bit of a distress where it will naturally wear. So we're going to do that in a minute, but we're going to go into the cabinets, because what am I going to paint the cabinets if my furniture's all gray? My chair legs are going to be gray. The top of my table is going to be like a barn board. I'm going to have a little bit of a stripe on my cushion. I don't really want a whole lot of color here because it's going to compete with everything that I've got going on the table all the time. So what we've decided to do is our trim is going to be, it's all being repainted now to pure white. We're going to pure white these cabinets. We're going to paint the inside of them as well because that's yellowed quite a bit over time. We're going to paint the inside of the, I guess it's like a serving station. And then we're going to do a little bit of stenciling. Whitewash the stenciling. We're going to echo the colors in the Swedish palette. We're going to soften that so that it looks like we've wallpapered the back of the cabinets. That's going to take a little while because we have to take everything out, paint it all first, and then go back and do the stenciling. So the next time you see the dining room, that's going to be the look you see as part of our finished look. So let's go back to this chair for a sec. I've got my sandpaper. I'm going to take my fine sandpaper, pull it pad over here so I don't make a big mess on the floor. And I am just going to lightly sand where my feet are likely to sit on this rung. Because you know what? That's what's going to happen anyway. And I don't know if you can get in and see that. There's just like a pencil line of the dark coming through. I'll go down and I'll do the same thing just a little bit, not all the way along, just a little bit where it's likely to wear. And I'll go over the whole thing. I'll do a little bit here because that's the corners are where you wear as well. That's where you handle chairs. You pull them in and out of the table. The back bumps into the wall. Very light. I've hardly got any pressure on this at all. I don't want to expose a whole lot of this, of the wood. Just want a hint of it. And if you're not sure where to distress, think about how you use it. You hold these chairs here. That's where they'd normally wear. That's where you're going to push them in and out. When you're sitting in a chair, it's where your feet go. It's where the back of your legs hit it. If this has a cushion on it, so it's not exactly the same. It's anywhere your body rests or moves or, you know, uses the chair. If you're going to use it here, you're going to be pulling it in and out. From the back of the chair, you might do this when you're pushing it. Just look at it, handle it. Figure out how you use those chairs. That's where your natural wear is. That's all it should be. Not a lot of wear, just a very natural finish that wears on a bit. Might wear just a little bit here from your back sitting on it, resting on it over time. And here's the beauty of this. If you get it all done and you don't like it, or you've sanded back a little bit too much, paint it again. Do this before you wax, and then when you wax it, you've got a beautifully finished chair that will take an awful lot of abuse, a lot of parties and games sitting around the dining room table. So let's go back and look at this cushion. So we have 2 coats of paint on each of these stripes now on our chair pad. I know I keep calling it a cushion, but it is a chair pad. And I'm just going to pull off the tape. And you're going to see the Scandinavian pink stripe that I did earlier. Pull this off. And the last one. Now I have a little bit here of a bleed out of my Chateau Gray, and I can decide if that's going to bother me a whole lot. And if I don't think it is going to bother me a whole lot, I'll just leave it. But if it does bother me, I would just take my brush, take a little bit of Paris Gray and just touch that up. So that's what we have. It's a very effective finish using the palette that's in our Scandinavian collection. I don't have my stick here for my Obasan. So now I just have to wax this. I'm not entirely sure. I'm not going to do it with white wax, but we're going to start with clear wax and see how it looks. And this is just exactly the same, and I'm only going to go just up to my blue because that green is still a little bit wet, and I don't want to drag the wax through the wet paint. That Chateau Gray still has a little bit of a sheen to it, but you can see the wax is changing the color, just a little bit of the gray. It's going to make it a little bit darker. It'll do exactly the same thing to the chairs themselves, so I'm going to have a little bit richer color, and I just work this in just exactly the same as I would if I were doing any other kind of painted piece. Work it right in all the way down around the edge. And one thing I like about putting wax on something that has color is that you can see where you've missed it, because the color of the paint actually changes. You can see this is darker than the side over here. And I'm just going to grab a cloth and do a little bit of buffing. So now I'm just going to wipe off my excess wax the same way as I would always. And in case you're wondering, when this is finished and dry, the wax is not going to come off on your favorite pair of jeans. It's going to be as dry and as carefree as your cupboard doors. It never comes off. You'd have to sit on it with a hair dryer or something, glossy, to soften the wax. So I'm just taking off the excess wax. I'm going to give it a bit of a buff, and I will go back over this. I'm going to let it wait and see what I like, how I like it when it's all dry. And I may end up muting it a little bit by using the white wax. I think I kind of fell in love with the white wax. But this is made a nice supple seat. It's not going to crack when I sit on it. It's going to be, when I finish doing the whole thing, it's going to be wipeable, so no matter what spills on here, we'll be able to just clean it right up, and it'll make a really durable chair cushion, chair pad. I'll get that right. So that is our painted fabric. And I hope you try this at home. This is a really easy thing to do. You can do this on lampshades, cushions, all kinds of things. Next week, yes, we'll be back, and we'll be back in the living room. And we're going to be looking at what I did with the fireplace surround and how I finished it, and what I did with the mantle. And we'll be starting two things: our little bookcase desk table and the big cabinet that we use. We're not exactly sure what we're going to use. We used to keep dishes in there, but we don't need that anymore, so it's probably going to be a bookcase. We'll see you next episode.